Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're really plunging into something that, well, it lives right there in your browser. Tools many of us use constantly, often without even thinking twice.
Absolutely. We're talking about browser extensions.
Exactly. Those little things, the productivity boosters, the handy helpers, maybe just ways you customize how things look online.
Mm-hmm. They just sit there quietly in the browser toolbar usually, promising to make life a bit easier, whether you're working or shopping or just browsing around.
And I think most of us, we really do see them as pretty harmless, don't we? Just little add-ons.
That seems to be the default assumption, yeah. We install them for all kinds of reasons.
Oh yeah, blocking ads, managing passwords is a big one, taking notes, finding coupons online.
Integrating with other work tools, the list just goes on and on. They really become part of our daily habits, our workflow.
Indispensable sometimes. But okay, here's the thing. The source material we're looking at for this deep dive, it reveals a, let's say, less comfortable truth.
hmm It suggests these seemingly innocuous, helpful tools can actually hide some pretty significant security risks.
That's really the core message that jumps out from the sources we've been given, isn't it?
It really is loud and clear.
Yeah.
They lay out the honestly surprising scale of the dangers tied to browser extensions.
Yeah.
And then they introduce this specific resource, something we at LayerX developed called ExtensionPedia. The idea, as the sources describe it, is to help shine a light on these risks.
Okay, so it's about giving people, and businesses too, I guess, a way to understand them better.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is pretty straightforward. We're going to unpack the security challenges that the sources say browser extensions pose.
Understand why there may be a bigger deal than many of us realize based on this material.
Right. And then we'll dive into what the sources tell us about this ExtensionPedia resource we created, what it is, how it works, who it's for.
And just to be clear, all our insights today, they're coming directly from the source material provided.
That's right. Specifically, we've got excerpts from the LayerX website pages describing ExtensionPedia, the broader LayerX platform, and also a recent press release that announced ExtensionPedia.
So our job is to guide you, the listener, through this material, pull out the really important bits, the key takeaways.
Yep. Let's unpack these sources then and figure out what you really need to know about browser extensions and, well, the security side of things.
Okay, where do we start? The risks, I guess.
Yeah, let's start there. Section 1 in our thinking. The hidden risks. The material really brings this into sharp focus, asking us to maybe rethink that default idea that they're always just harmless little tools.
And the first big point that just leaps out from the source material, it's about access, the level of access these extensions often get.
The documents use pretty strong language here. They explicitly state that extensions often receive extensive access permissions.
Okay, extensive access permissions. What does that actually mean in practice, according to the sources? Why is that the starting point for the risk?
Well, it's absolutely critical because it directly explains why they can become a security problem. It means these little tools sitting right there in your browser.
Where you do everything online.
Exactly. They can potentially access extremely sensitive stuff, things like your browsing history, your passwords, your cookies.
Wow, okay, passwords and cookies, that's not trivial. Cookies keep you logged into sites, right? Session info. And browsers store passwords, if an extension can grab those.
Well, the sources are pretty direct about the implications. They state clearly that this kind of access makes extensions a prime attack channel.
A prime attack channel.
Yeah.
Because they're already inside the castle walls, so to speak. They're in the browser where you handle your most sensitive interactions.
Precisely. And think about the kinds of attacks the material describes stemming from this.
The sources list several specific outcomes. Credential theft is one.
Stealing your logins, basically.
Account takeover. Using those stolen credentials, or maybe session cookies.
Right. Getting into your accounts without even needing the password sometimes.
And just general data theft. Scraping information from pages you visit.
Yeah, imagine an extension that, I don't know, seems useful, helps you manage tabs maybe, but it's also quietly scraping login details as you type them.
Or one that promises discounts, but is actually built to steal those session cookies, letting an attacker hijack your active sessions.
The material paints a really clear picture. These aren't just theoretical risks. They're described as very real, very serious possibilities.
And the sources, they don't really pull any punches on how serious this is perceived to be, right?
Not at all. They actually describe malicious browser extensions using a specific phrase, the most underrated identity security threats.
Underrated. That suggests a lot of people, maybe even security folks, aren't fully aware of the scale or the potential impact here.
I think that's exactly the implication, and the sources try to back that up with some pretty alarming numbers.
Okay, what kind of scale are we talking about? Real-world impact, according to these documents.
Yeah. The material highlights that in just the last 6 months prior to its writing, these kinds of malicious extensions were linked to multiple breaches, multiple vulnerabilities. And the scope is significant. They apparently exposed nearly 10 million users worldwide to identity risks and data theft just in that 6-month window.
10 million users in half a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
That number really underscores the scale, doesn't it? It makes that underrated label feel, well, pretty accurate.
Definitely. And it's not just, random incidents bubbling up. The sources mentioned this has caught the attention of major security organizations.
Right. The material specifically notes that the FBI, according to the reviewed text, has even issued warnings about the risks tied to compromised browser extensions.
The FBI. Okay, yeah, when a national agency like that puts out warnings, that's usually a pretty clear signal that it's a recognized significant threat vector.
No question.
The sources also dig into why it's so tricky for users, for you listening, to just trust extensions or figure out if they're safe on your own.
Yeah.
It's not always about developers setting out to build something bad from day one.
Exactly. That's a key point in the documents. They explain that an extension might be created with perfectly good intentions initially.
Sure, a developer makes a useful tool.
But later, it can be co-opted by bad actors. That's the phrase they use.
Co-opted? How does that happen?
Well, the sources suggest a few ways. Maybe the original developer sells the extension to someone else, someone less scrupulous. Or maybe the developer's own account gets compromised.
Okay. Or they get tricked, maybe.
Social engineering.
Yeah, maybe pushed into adding some malicious code they don't fully understand. And once an extension is compromised, or if it was bad from the start, the sources say it can then be broadly reshared.
Meaning, one bad extension can spread really quickly.
Exactly. Affecting a huge number of users who downloaded it thinking it was legitimate, maybe based on its earlier reputation. That's particularly nasty, that co-opted idea. Because it means an extension you've trusted, maybe used safely for years even, could suddenly turn dangerous without you changing anything.
Right. And for you, the average user, or even an IT team member, how easy is it really to get the full picture on every single extension, to assess its current risk?
Well, the source material is pretty blunt about that challenge.
It is. It explicitly states that getting that full information, being able to properly assess the risk of each extension you use, is essentially out of reach for most users.
But why? You'd think the places we get them from the official Chrome web store, the Edge add-on store, Firefox add-ons, wouldn't they handle the vetting? Shouldn't they catch this stuff?
That's the logical assumption, but this is where the sources offer a really critical perspective on how things currently work. They state quite clearly, actually, that the extension stores only do a superficial job of vetting extensions.
Superficial. That sounds lacking. What do the sources mean by that? What's missing?
Well, the material explains it like this. The stores may do simple verifications for obvious red flags. So maybe checking against known malware signatures or looking for developers with a known history of abuse. Basic stuff.
Okay, the low-hanging fruit, maybe.
Right. But the sources say they don't typically investigate deeper indicators of suspicious or malicious behavior as part of their standard review workflow.
So the really blatant stuff might get caught. But more sophisticated threats, or things that only become risky later.
Those could easily slip through, based on this description. It's framed as more of a surface-level check, not a deep, ongoing security analysis for every single extension update.
Okay, let's pause and bring this back to you, the listener, for a second. Just think about your own browser right now.
Yeah.
How many extensions do you actually have installed?
Take a quick mental count. Maybe an ad blocker, a password manager helper.
A screenshot tool, that shopping assistant that pops up. Maybe some work tools that integrate with Salesforce or Jira.
Okay, so you've got that number in your head. Now remember the sources saying how much access they can have potentially to browsing data, passwords, cookies.
And then layer on top what we just heard from the material, that the official stores you likely got them from might have only done a superficial security check.
How can you really be sure which of those extensions are truly safe? Right now?
How do you know that tool you rely on isn't secretly grabbing more data than it needs? Or that it wasn't quietly updated last week with some malicious code after the developer sold it?
This uncertainty, this difficulty in knowing the real risk, this is the core widespread security challenge with browser extensions that the sources are highlighting.
Yeah. It's described as a problem affecting millions, recognized by agencies like the FBI, and one that the standard vetting methods aren't fully equipped to solve.
And this problem, this gap, the lack of easily accessible, detailed risk information, leads us directly into the solution that the source material introduces, which is ExtensionPedia.
Right. So the sources present ExtensionPedia as the resource we developed, specifically to tackle this exact challenge. Assessing extension risk, making that information available.
It's described in the material as a one-stop comprehensive resource. Its whole focus is evaluating the security of browser extensions.
And the goal, as the sources put it, is to fill that information gap we were just talking about.
Yeah, its stated purpose is apparently to make it possible for the first time for both individuals and businesses to easily access extension risk analyses.
So you can actually distinguish between safe, risky, and outright malicious tools. That sounds like a direct answer to that superficial vetting problem.
It does. It's explicitly called a Browser Extensions Risk Database and Knowledge Center in the material. So it suggests you get structured data plus maybe educational content too.
And the sources clearly state that we, LayerX, created this.
Yes. And they also emphasize its accessibility. It's offered online as a public service.
A public service. So it's not just for big companies paying for the LayerX platform.
No, according to the sources, it's explicitly for use by both individuals and enterprises. Anyone can potentially go to the ExtensionPedia site.
And what can they do there?
They can find detailed risk assessments, scores, before they decide to install an extension. That before seems key.
That ability to check before you hit Add to Chrome or Get seems really valuable, especially with that whole co-opted after installation risk we talked about.
Right. It gives you a point-in-time assessment based on the latest analysis, and the material confirms it covers extensions across the major stores, Chrome, Edge, and Firefox.
Okay, but where does all this assessment data actually come from? How do we generate these risk scores, according to the source material?
The sources state that the assessments you find in ExtensionPedia are based on anonymous data garnered from millions of sessions using the LayerX platform.
Ah, okay. So the insights are derived from real-world observation, analyzing how extensions behave across many users of our broader security platform, but anonymized.
That's how it's described, yes, leveraging that broad visibility to feed the public database.
Okay, let's connect this back to you again, listener. Think about the last time you considered installing a new extension. Maybe it was one of those new AI integrations or a different note taker or something for a game you play.
How did you decide if it was safe? You probably looked at the star rating, maybe the number of users, glanced at the publisher name.
Right. The sources suggest ExtensionPedia is designed to give you a much deeper layer of security-focused information about those exact tools.
Information about specific risks, like permissions and reputation, that goes beyond what you typically find on the store page or in user reviews.
So it's positioned as a resource to help you make a more informed, safer decision before you click that install button.
Exactly. Now that we've sort of introduced what ExtensionPedia is and its purpose based on these sources, let's get into the nitty-gritty. What does the material say about its specific features? How does it actually present this risk info?
Okay, well, the sources give us some actual numbers on scale. How many extensions are we talking about in this database?
The source material is specific here. It says the database contains data on over 200,000 extensions.
Over 200,000. That's a lot.
It's substantial, yeah. And again, covering Chrome, Edge, and Firefox stores, given the sheer volume of extensions out there, having a database that size is pretty significant.
Definitely. But, okay, the number is big, but the real value has got to be in the assessment itself, right? How does ExtensionPedia, as described in the sources, actually figure out the risk? What's it looking at?
These sources highlight that it provides detailed scoring, and it calls out two specific parameters, permission scope and reputation risk.
Okay, permission scope. That immediately rings a bell from our earlier discussion. That's about the level of access they request. Why is that so critical for risk assessment based on the sources?
The source material is very clear here. It explicitly points out that the permission scope, what an extension asks to be able to see and do, is a key factor hackers exploit.
Because it directly determines what data it can access.
Precisely. That includes, as the sources mentioned before, your browsing data, your passwords, your cookies. So an extension asking for really broad permissions, like access data on all websites or read data on sensitive sites,
Inherently presents a bigger risk than one asking for very limited access, like only working on one specific website.
Exactly. Even if the extension isn't malicious today, That broad permission creates a larger potential attack surface. So ExtensionPedia assesses this scope as a core part of its risk calculation, according to the material.
Makes sense. The requested permissions are a fundamental indicator of potential harm. The other factor mentioned was reputation risk. Now, the sources don't seem to detail the exact methodology for calculating this, do they?
No, they don't list the specific signals used for scoring reputation risk, but mentioning it alongside permission scope suggests it's evaluating factors beyond just the technical permissions.
So what might that cover, based on the context the sources provide?
Well, thinking back to that point about extensions being potentially co-opted by bad actors, reputation risk could potentially relate to things like the publisher's track record.
Okay, have they published problematic extensions before?
Right. Or maybe any past suspicious behavior observed from this specific extension or publisher. Maybe even how it's distributed or marketed. Does it use deceptive tactics?
The sources just state it's a scored parameter,
Yeah.
separate from permission.
Exactly. It indicates there's another dimension of risk being considered related to trust in history, not just technical capability.
So ExtensionPedia looks at permission scope, reputation risk, maybe other factors too, and then what does it actually show the user?
The sources say it generates a single, unified, and holistic risk score.
Okay, one overall number or rating.
Presumably, yeah. Designed to give you that quick, easy-to-digest indicator of the extension's overall security posture.
A single score is good for a fast check,
Hmm.
but sometimes you want the why, right? Why did it get that score? Does it offer more detail?
It does. The sources specifically mention that alongside that high-level overall score, ExtensionPedia also provides granular breakdowns of permissions and reputation risks.
Ah, okay. So you can see the overall rating, but then you could drill down.
Yeah, you can see the specifics. Which permissions is it asking for? How does it score in the reputation category? This granular view helps you understand what contributes to the overall risk score.
What other information is there? Just the scores?
No, according to the sources, for each extension, you can also find full data on the extension, details, publisher, and more.
So the basics, who made it, version number, description, context.
Exactly. Essential context to understand the extension beyond just its risk assessment.
And how is all this information organized? How do you actually use the database to find what you're looking for?
The sources describe a few ways to interact with it. First, you can search. If you know the name of an extension or even its unique ID from the store, you can search for it directly.
What if you don't have a specific one in mind? Maybe you're just worried about a certain type of extension.
Then you can explore. The database lets you browse by different extension categories. The sources list several examples,
Like what?
like GenAI extensions, ChatGPT wrappers or similar tools, media extensions, password managers, productivity tools, translation extensions, even VPN extensions.
Okay, so you could look at, say, all the listed VPN extensions and compare their risk scores side by side.
That seems to be the idea, yes. Explore categories, compare risk profiles within that category.
And can you specifically find the ones flagged as high risk?
Yes, the sources also mention the ability to identify risky extensions. So you could presumably filter or sort to surface the tools with the highest risk scores, either by name or by category.
And beyond the database of extensions itself, the sources mention a knowledge center component too.
That's described as containing resources, articles, and guides on browser extension security, and also information on how to protect against malicious extensions.
So it's not just a lookup tool. It's also trying to educate users about the broader issues and best practices.
That's what it sounds like, yes. Providing context and actionable advice beyond just the risk scores for individual extensions.
Okay, so let's quickly recap what the sources tell us about ExtensionPedia's features. It's a big database, over 200,000 extensions, major browsers covered. It offers detailed risk scoring based on key things like permission scope and reputation risk.
Right. You get a single overall score, but also those granular breakdowns so you can see the details, plus info on the publisher, etc.
You can search for specific extensions, explore by category like productivity or GenAI, and identify the risky ones. And there's a knowledge center for more learning.
It really seems purpose-built, based on these descriptions, to provide that crucial risk information that the sources claim is often missing or hard to get elsewhere.
Aiming to empower you, the user, to make safer choices before installing.
Precisely. It's presented as directly addressing that information gap we talked about at the start. Now, this naturally leads into the broader implications, especially how this fits into an enterprise context, which the source material also details.
Right. The sources frame ExtensionPedia as helpful for individuals, sure, using the public site, But how does it connect to what LayerX offers for businesses?
This is where the integration comes in. The source material explicitly states that ExtensionPedia is accessible from both within the LayerX management console as well as online.
Ah, okay. So while the online version is public, the same intelligence or a version of it is baked into the enterprise platform.
It seems so. It suggests ExtensionPedia's data and analysis engine is a key component powering our organizational security solution.
And how is the LayerX platform itself described in these sources?
It's presented as an all-in-one agentless security platform, and importantly for this discussion, it's delivered as an enterprise browser extension.
Wait, so the LayerX platform uses its own browser extension to help manage and secure other browser extensions within a company, among other things.
That's the model described in the sources, yes. Our platform extension monitors and controls activity within the browser environment, including the behavior and risks associated with other extensions.
Okay. And the material details specific capabilities of the platform for managing extension security in an enterprise.
It does. The first crucial capability mentioned is comprehensive audit.
What does that mean for a company using the platform?
The sources say this lets organizations discover all extensions on all browsers for all users. Just think about a medium or large company.
Hundreds, maybe thousands of employees using Chrome, Edge, Firefox.
Each potentially installing their own mix of extensions over time. Manually getting a handle on which extensions are actually out there across the entire workforce, that's a huge challenge.
Almost impossible manually, I'd imagine.
Right. So this capability, as described, provides full visibility and control. The material says the management console shows key info for every discovered extension: who has it, its permission scope, its category, how it got installed, manually via policy, its source, and more.
That audit function, that complete visibility, sounds like step one for any organization wanting to tackle extension risks seriously.
It seems foundational, yeah. Once you actually know what's out there, what's the next capability the sources mention?
Next up is rich risk classification.
And this is where the kind of intelligence we see in ExtensionPedia gets leveraged internally for the enterprise. The source explains that our platform assesses the risk profile of every discovered extension using internal and external risk factors.
So it's not just identifying them, it's scoring their risk based on potentially more enterprise-specific context too.
It seems like a more tailored or deeper assessment within the platform context, yes.
Yeah.
Going beyond a simple block-a-low list to give a nuanced understanding of each extension's potential security posture within that specific organization's environment.
Okay, so you audit, you classify the risk, then what?
Then you get to adaptive enforcement, and the sources really emphasize that this goes beyond manual block lists.
Okay, why is moving beyond manual block lists important for a company, according to these sources? What's wrong with the old way?
The source material points out that traditional manual block lists usually just rely on the extension's unique ID.
Right, you block this specific ID.
Yeah, but that approach has real limitations. First, it needs constant manual upkeep. New risky extensions pop up all the time, variations emerge, you're always playing catch-up.
And it's rigid, right? It's either blocked or it's not. Hard to have nuance.
Exactly. Plus, if an attacker just changes the extension ID slightly, or a developer re-releases a tweaked version, your block list might suddenly become useless until you manually find and add the new ID.
Okay, so how does the adaptive approach described for LayerX address those problems?
It's described as being automated. And it's based on that detailed risk classification we just talked about, the one using internal and external risk factors, likely incorporating ExtensionPedia-like data.
So the enforcement decisions aren't just based on a static ID.
Right. The source says these risk indicators inform adaptive risk-based enforcement policies, meaning the policy actions are triggered by the current assessed risk of the extension, not just its name or ID. It's more dynamic.
What kind of enforcement actions can companies actually take with these adaptive policies? Is it just blocking?
No. The sources list a whole range of options, which allows for much more granularity in tailoring policies to specific needs.
Like what?
Like setting a policy to just monitor an extension, watch what it does without blocking it, maybe for investigation. Or you can warn users if they try to install or use a risky extension.
With custom messages.
Yeah.
Like, hey, this extension asks for a lot of permissions. Are you sure?
Exactly. The sources mention customizable messages to educate users in the moment. Then, of course, you can outright disable existing extensions if they cross a certain risk threshold.
And prevent new risky ones from being installed in the first place.
Yes, preventing the installation of new extensions that meet certain risk criteria is another option listed. This range allows organizations to set policies that match their risk tolerance and workflows, not just a blunt yes or no.
And the sources also mentioned the user experience side of things for enterprises, because security tools can sometimes be disruptive.
They do. A key benefit highlighted is 0% user friction. The material describes LayerX as being easy to deploy and having no impact on the user browsing experience or existing workflows.
That's a big claim. For enterprise security, minimizing that disruption is often make or break for successful adoption, isn't it?
Absolutely. If a security tool slows people down or breaks their workflows, they'll find ways around it, so aiming for zero friction is a major goal.
The source material also includes, quotes, testimonials from actual customers using the LayerX platform. Who are these people providing feedback?
The sources list a variety of relevant roles: CISOs, architecture associate directors, information security managers, directors of security operations, IT security and risk managers, directors of network operations. Pretty representative of security and IT leadership.
Okay. And what are some of the specific positives they attribute to LayerX in these quotes? What stands out?
Well, several themes emerge from the testimonials presented. Ease of implementation comes up crucial for getting value quickly.
Makes sense. What else?
They specifically mention robust extension management using single console across all browsers. That ties directly back to that comprehensive audit capability we discussed.
Okay, so confirming that visibility piece.
Yep. Also, real-time threat detection, suggesting it's continuously monitoring, not just a one-time scan. Seamless experience reinforces that zero-user friction point.
What about the controls?
They praise robust granularity and very effective control, which speaks to that adaptive, risk-based enforcement, the ability to set detailed policies.
Does it actually help at the core problem, preventing bad extensions?
Yes, one quote explicitly says it helps prevent employees from adding malicious browser extensions, so directly addressing the primary risk.
Any other highlights from the testimonials?
Yeah, a few others reinforce the broader value. Things like needing a solution for creating policies to protect data, and the platform helping protect our company's apps from data loss and account takeover.
So connecting extension risk to broader data security goals.
Exactly. One person notes it's better than a SWG secure web gateway and network solutions for securing cloud access. They also mention ease of use, get my job done in an easier fashion, effectiveness, high block rate of phishing attacks, good support. Support team is extremely responsive.
And the quality of the insights.
Deep and useful insights on the extensions in use, again tying back to the audit and classification and overall ease of management. System is easy to set up and administer.
Okay, so let's connect this back to you again, listener, especially if you're in an organizational role. Managing potentially thousands of extensions across hundreds or thousands of users. It's a huge challenge, right? Security-wise, operationally.
Definitely.
The sources suggest that a platform like LayerX, by offering that complete visibility first,
Then integrating rich reclassification like the kind powering ExtensionPedia.
and finally enabling those flexible adaptive enforcement policies that go beyond just blocking IDs.
Provides a more scalable, more nuanced, and ultimately more effective way for organizations to get a handle on browser extension risk compared to trying to do it manually or with less specialized tools.
And the testimonials included in the source material seem to back up those claimed benefits, highlighting things like ease of use, the detailed control, and its effectiveness in actually preventing threats.
Yeah, it positions ExtensionPedia not just as that useful public resource, but also as the core intelligence feeding a comprehensive enterprise solution designed to tackle this very widespread problem.
Now, while we've focused heavily on extension security because ExtensionPedia is central to that, the sources do briefly place this capability within the broader context of the LayerX platform. It does more than just extensions, right?
Yes, absolutely. The material makes it clear that LayerX is positioned as more than just an extension manager. It's framed as a broader security solution, tackling various modern web and SaaS risks.
What other kinds of risks does the platform aim to address, according to the sources?
The sources quickly list several other critical areas, things like GenAI data leakage, preventing sensitive company info from being pasted into public ChatGPT or similar tools.
Okay, that's a big one right now.
Definitely. Also, various SaaS application risks, general identity threats like phishing, targeting SaaS logins, web vulnerabilities, including zero-hour phishing attacks that might bypass other defenses.
What else?
Data loss prevention, DLP, specifically for web traffic. Identifying and controlling shadow SaaS or shadow AI, use employees using unapproved cloud apps. Securing access for BYOD users and contractors. And just generally addressing broader identity and password risks as they appear in the browser.
That's a pretty wide net of modern threats, all centered around browser and web app usage.
It is, and the source material consistently reiterates the core mechanism. It's deployed as an enterprise browser extension itself, integrating with whatever browser the employee is already using, Chrome, Edge, Firefox, etc.
And the key benefit claim for that specific delivery method.
The sources emphasize that this approach provides full last-mile visibility and enforcement without disrupting the user experience.
Last mile, meaning right where the user interacts with the web.
Exactly. By operating within the browser process itself, it can apparently see and control interactions directly without needing network proxies or heavy agents installed on the OS, which can sometimes cause compatibility issues or slowdowns.
And the overall stated purpose for enterprises using this platform.
According to the sources, enterprises use LayerX to secure their hybrid workforce in a SaaS-first world.
Which reflects how work happens now, right? People everywhere using cloud apps constantly.
Precisely. And the sources also briefly mention LayerX as providing alternatives to some other existing security technologies.
Yeah, what were those?
The material positions it as an RBI alternative, RBI being remote browser isolation. LayerX apparently claims superior protection compared to RBI, but with lower management overhead and without the potential performance impact or user experience issues sometimes associated with RBI.
Okay. And the other one?
VDI reduction. VDI is virtual desktop infrastructure. The suggestion is that the platform can help companies reduce reliance on expensive, complex VDI setups by providing secure access to web apps and resources directly through the native browser, potentially lowering the total cost of ownership, TCO.
Got it. The sources don't really explain what RBI or VDI are in detail. They just state LayerX is presented as an alternative.
Correct. Just positioning points mentioned in the provided text.
All right, well, that feels like a pretty thorough journey through the source material we had on browser extension security and the resources like ExtensionPedia and the broader LayerX platform aimed at addressing those risks.
Yeah, I think we've covered the main points highlighted in the documents. Should we quickly summarize the key takeaways?
Good idea. Let's boil it down. First, the material makes it abundantly clear. Browser extensions, super popular, super convenient, but they pose significant, often underrated security risks.
Because they can get extensive access, passwords, cookies, browsing data, making them, as the sources say, a prime attack channel for credential theft, account takeover, data loss, affecting millions, even drawing FBI warnings.
Second takeaway, the vetting done by the official extension stores. The sources describe it as superficial. It catches some things, maybe, but misses deeper or evolving threats, leaving a big security gap.
Third, that's where a resource like ExtensionPedia comes in, which we at LayerX developed. The source is presented as a public service, a one-stop resource designed to fill that gap, providing the visibility and detailed risk assessment that's otherwise hard to get.
And we learned from the sources it covers over 200,000 extensions, scores them on permission scope, reputation risk, gives you an overall score and the details, lets you search, explore categories, find risky ones, and has a knowledge center too.
Right. Then fourth, this intelligence connects directly into the LayerX enterprise platform. Delivered as its own browser extension, it aims to give organizations that comprehensive audit see all extensions everywhere.
Plus, rich risk classification using similar intelligence. And importantly, that adaptive risk-based enforcement that's more flexible and dynamic than just manual block lists, all while aiming for zero user friction.
And the sources included testimonials backing this up, praising the ease of use, the management capabilities, the real-time detection, the effective control over extension risks, and data protection.
Finally, the sources place all this within the context of LayerX being a broader platform for securing the modern, hybrid, SaaS-driven workforce against a range of web risks, positioning it as an alternative to things like RBI and VDI in some cases.
That seems like a good summary of what the provided material covered.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive, drawing directly from the insights in these sources we've explored today.
Consider those statistics we mentioned, millions affected by malicious extensions in just 6 months, the FBI warnings. Think about the sheer volume of sensitive data, both personal and work stuff, that flows through your browser every single day.
Knowing all that, does learning about these hidden risks, understanding the limitations of store vetting, and knowing about resources like ExtensionPedia that are designed to provide deeper risk insights. Does that change how you think about or maybe how you plan to manage the extensions you have installed right now on your own browsers, both for work and for personal use?
Definitely something worth pondering.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.